Hello, good afternoon, everyone from India, and a very good evening, everyone joining from Australia and the Philippines. It's a proud pleasure and privilege for all of us to be gathering here again as we get into the second episode of our much awaited knowledge series of IWBI and BuzzOnEarth collaboration for Well in India. And we have a very special guest with us today, Victor Maningo. Hi, Victor. Very warm welcome to the session.
Hi, Gayatri. Always nice to see you and always nice to catch up.
Great. So, Victor, just to get the perspective right, what is the time at your place right now?
Well, I'm currently based out of the Philippines, Manila, Philippines, but one of my remits for the organization is all over Asia Pacific. So I've done quite a bit of work around the region and globally.
Okay. So it must be late evening already for you, and we are here to talk about wellness. And this is one of the things that we all understand, that most of the time spent by all of us, I think more than 90% of the time that we spend indoors, it is either in our office buildings or the residential buildings or a school or any other kind of built environment that we are always, boxed inside. So, which makes it all the more important that if we want to have a thriving, healthy, and wellness prone lifestyle, then it is important that our buildings are also equally supporting that vision and mission. And that is what IWBI is working towards. It is on a very high level mission which transcends the environmental cause when it comes to buildings, as we have already seen with certifications like LEED and IGBC, green rating systems, and various other, UK-based BREEAM and all the other rating systems that focus on the fact that how green buildings are impacting the environment. Here we are talking about how a building is impacting the occupant and their own health, well-being, and productivity. So we are talking about buildings that would help us nurture the creativity within, inspire us to be the best version of who we are. So with that, we have several questions that keep coming in, and the knowledge series is meant to actually bridge that information gap and transcend the doubts and move towards action. So here we have, identified and converged on three main topics from the very first conversation that we had. And before we delve into that, I would request Victor to please, introduce yourself, tell us a little more about yourself so that we can relate with you as a person.
Sure, no problem. Thank you very much, Gayatri. Well, first and foremost, my background is actually in architecture. I studied architecture and I practiced architecture for about 16 years. And I've had the good fortune of being able to practice architecture in both the US and Asia. And one of the things that has always kind of struck me as pretty profound is how the built environment can really affect a person's physical, mental, and even social health, and even emotional health for that matter. I mean, who we actually sit next to in our offices and our workplace really do affect us. And there's even been studies that show that if we have a friend at work, that we're actually more productive. So that's always been kind of really intriguing to me. And not only that, I always say that one of the things that I found intriguing in studying architecture is that, buildings have only been around for about 250, 300 years. For the most part of human history, we've actually spent our times outdoors in nature, and that's where we do some of our best work. So that's one of the things that really kind of struck me when I started with IWBI is
Victor, you're on mute.
Whoops. Okay,
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure why I got muted.
Yeah.
But yeah, so essentially what I was saying was one of the things that's really kind of struck me, had this gravitational pull to me to IWBI, was really kind of returning back to the built environment, but really kind of focusing on something that I'm really passionate about, and that's health and wellness and how the space can affect that.
Wonderful. Great. And I would like to bring a little bit of detour here, and that is around the Gaia hypothesis. I'm sure many of you know that Gaia is the Greek word for Mother Earth. And there is an entire postulate that revolves around this hypothesis, that is, the organic and the inorganic matter in the world is constantly interacting with each other. And it is the nature of this interaction that makes the existence of life on this planet possible. And that's one very beautiful concept because it transcends physics, chemistry, and biology all put together. And the whole mystery around how the life came into existence and what is beyond life, all of these things actually get much simpler comprehension when we talk about this interaction. And when we talk about healthier buildings and the way buildings impact us and the way we impact our surroundings, it is all more and more interesting as we get into these discussions. So coming to the main discussion for today, since we are going to focus on three main topics, as part of our new partnership that is between IWBI and BuzzOnEarth, we are extremely excited about this vision and mission that IWBI is carrying forward. The first question that we have, in various forms experienced after the last session that we had, that how do well buildings, especially the office spaces, corporate offices who are having multiple office locations, how can they approach well rating and how does well at scale function? And what is the process? What kind of approach should be taken?
Sure. Before we get into that, I think one of the things that to set a little bit of context to talking about well and implementing it at scale is really to talk about what our mission is at IWBI. And that mission is really to lead the global movement in putting people first, in decision-making and culture of an organization. And to be able to do that, what we would like to do is affect that in mass, in large numbers.
Right.
And the way we obviously do that is through the WELL building standard, which is our evidence-based framework for all the WELL programs. But to answer the question specifically about WELL at scale, the program really, it's really about helping companies implement aspects of the WELL building standard across the entire organization in a very streamlined and cost-effective manner. It also helps companies think more broadly about the people that they serve, both internally and externally, as well as all of the assets that they hold, and try to make a more profound impact on the organization and eventually all the people that work in it, live in it, play in it. Essentially, the way the WELL at Scale program works is that organizations are able to consolidate all their locations, existing, new, and even potential assets, and then that we at IWBI can help plan a strategy around that, a wellness strategy around that. And the way we do that, it typically is we'll assign a specific technical coach or an advisor to help the project teams help and assess and advise the best path forward for each organization. And typically that's based on what the organization's leadership is trying to achieve within this space.
That's very interesting. So you're saying that it is pretty much governance centric. So you are trying to approach it through a very strategic pathway, ensuring that the governance and the leadership is in line with it. And it is not just a practical exercise done at the facilities management level, right?
Sure. No, typically an organization, will have a mandate, whether it's, trying to achieve social, to implement DE&I strategies, or if they're trying to achieve some sort of environmental strategy between 2030 or 2050, whatever the lead goals are, what we try to do is use the standard to be able to achieve those goals. And there's aspects of the standards. There's design and operational and there's design and construction interventions within the standard. There's operational and maintenance interventions within the standards, and there's also policy and governance-based ones. So within the robust standard, you can craft it to what the leadership is trying to achieve.
And since you mentioned diversity and inclusion, that brings me to a very interesting take that was launched about 12 months back, Well in Equity rating. Would you like to detail it about, what exactly it entails and how it transcends into diversity and inclusion goals for the organizations?
Sure. I think, one of the things, I mean, I think that's such a big question because it's it's really asking the reasons why an organization is trying to implement a DE&I policy. There's a lot of different reasons for that. Number one, it's obviously people centric. Number two, you're trying to mitigate risk within an organization. Number three, you're really trying to be supportive to your employees. So, and then, I think the difficult part around this is really around DE&I policies are very subjective in different geographies and different cultures. Having said all that, one of the things that we did at IWBI is really try to address that in a very kind of international and a very inclusive manner. So the standard really kind of looks at the way an organization is trying to implement some of these sensitive protocols within an organization, and then create a baseline of what's good and what's bad.
And when it comes to this baseline, is it still, I mean, is the collation of data still happening, or this is out and about and ready to be launched?
No, the well equity standard was actually piloted and was launched early last year. Having said that, in general, the well building standard as a framework is a living document. As technology changes, as policy changes, as the world changes, as science advances, we have to adapt the standard to that. And one of the things is we're always learning. One way that it kind of explains this is we learn quite a bit from different cultures, and we understand different types of businesses and the way they're run. One of the things that we're addressing now, as an example, is modern slavery. It's not something that we've addressed before, and it's something we're trying to address within the standard currently.
I would like to know a little more about that. So where is it even getting practiced at this day and age? It's quite shocking to even.
It's interesting. It's a very a tough question, but when we're looking at ESG reporting, and then you're starting to look at scope 3 aspects of ESG reporting, and then you start looking down the supply chain, it gets more difficult to be more transparent. So these are things that we're trying to address. It's stuff that we're trying to put metrics around. It's not easy to do, but at least this is the beginning point of starting to deal with these very difficult issues.
And if I may ask, how many projects have already registered for this?
I couldn't tell you offhand, to be honest. We're a global organization, and there's a lot of moving parts. I do know, as I mentioned earlier, MSD in Australia is one of the first to be able to implement the well equity rating. I'm currently working with a few oil and gas organizations that are using it as part of their workplace guidelines as a baseline to create their own DE&I policies within their workplace guidelines. So it's quite a few organizations are looking at the standard.
It's very interesting because the very mention of that sounds to be a very strategic intent from the top leadership that has to go into the overall governance structure of an organization. And I'm glad that IWBI is leading that from the front. So great. The next question, which is around a very interesting, concept that is catching up big time in India, that is the co-working spaces. So many of our listeners last time were very curious to understand if we could address this part in the second webinar, that how is well rating addressing co-working spaces, which is the next, I would say, the next generation working culture that is coming into picture.
Agreed 100%. I mean, I think when you look at the well building standard, or well, it really is for any space typology, anything that has 4 walls and a ceiling, anything that's part of the built environment. Having said that, co-working it doesn't necessarily require a different process than any traditional commercial space. However, this is, I think, an interesting subject because the way corporate real estate now is responding in light of the pandemic, with the fact that there was a lot of contractions with real estate. There's been hybrid work, there's been remote work, and organizations are giving up real estate, and co-working spaces are filling in that gap. They're able to be in the locations where their employees are. They're able to flex and contract and expand as organizations do really, really quickly. One of the things that these co-working spaces are doing are actually using the WELL standards or just certifications in general to give that competitive edge. One of the things that I've seen here, specifically in the Philippines and in India, because we've worked with a few co-working spaces, is they've trying to bring people back into a community of workplace. And the way they're able to do that, to provide comfort and knowledge that the places that they're entering are safe, is to be able to implement these programs.
And is there any kind of, wellness aspect related to the fact that people should come back to workplace and work from?
100%. I don't have the stats and facts in front of me, but I think humans in general are very tribal. We're very community driven. We need to belong to a space. We need to belong to a group. There's actually a word here in the Philippines that's used quite often. It's barkada, and barkada means my tribe. People like to belong to something. And I think being able to get people back into the office and be able to obviously collaborate and think and brainstorm together and share ideas, laugh together, I think those things are all part positive aspects, and obviously positive aspects of a healthy environment.
Interesting. And when it comes to co-working places, one of the important aspects that I've personally felt is the shared utilities, right? And shared utilities when it comes to even sharing a cafeteria. So that brings in some very quality-centric conversations which are outside of your own tribe, I would say. For instance, an engineering company, if they are having lunch with a biotechnology company, which is into a totally different segment, say of nutraceuticals, then the kind of conversations that will happen, they just tend to get into those intersections. And somewhere, while that sounds very interesting, but I would like to know if there are any stats and facts and any relevant case studies and researches done that support the fact that this kind of intermingling of conversations, cultures, and dialects adds any value.
Oh, I'm sure it adds a lot of value. I mean, I don't have any hard numbers, but I can tell you from personal experience myself. I was practicing architecture, as I mentioned, for so long. And typically, when you look at a traditional space, you'll take the interior designers, the engineers, and the architects, and you'll separate them. Well, there was one instance where I was actually working in a project office when we were all together. And I was trying to solve a very simple problem. But when you put your architectural hat on, you try to design, you create more problems by trying to design through it. And I remember one of the senior engineers just looking over my shoulder, and he goes, "Why don't you just put the opening here? No one can see it anyway." So those quick efficiencies for problem solving are definitely out there, but I don't have any hard stats and facts, but I know from personal experience they do exist.
Okay, great. And the other question is very, very interesting, again, especially in the context of an emerging economy like India, which is very price sensitive and very quality sensitive as well. So we want to always get more value for the given price that is paid. And whether this price is paid to a certification agency versus that price is paid for buying a certain product or for buying a certain experience. So on all the three parts, there is one word called optimum or most cost-effective solution that would be attained. So how does WELL address that when it comes to cost-effective solutions being seeked by the users?
Sure. I think, we've thought about this actually for quite some time, especially when we're getting into markets in Southeast Asia and India and in this part of the world. One of the easiest solutions or one of the quickest ways or one of the ways that we've been able to address that is through the Well at Scale program. Instead of going through a single asset and trying to do a full well certification, by consolidating all of the locations or all of the assets together and being able to, how do you say, scale a lot of the work that needs to get done, creates a lot of efficiencies and cost reductions. As an example, if an organization puts, say, 10 buildings together and say, we're going to try to achieve well certification or a health safety rating for a certain organization, and that organization has a policy, and let's take no non-smoking or no smoking as a policy, that documentation can be done once and submitted to all 10 assets at the same time, rather than one by one, which is the way it was done in the past. So those, number one, reduce time, effort, and cost. So doing it at scale would be one way. Another way we've done it is really by giving sector discounts to organizations, whether sector discounts would be emerging markets, which India falls in. So there's a very specific discount applied to that. Government work, educational work, and even for small businesses. And a small business would be an organization that's 50 people or less, or $10 million in revenue or less in a year. So there's a lot of mechanisms built in to be able to create cost effectiveness.
And are we intending to further build upon it? I mean, trying to address and trying to be in line with the aspiration of IWBI to have a much more expansive market in India?
Yes, I definitely. I mean, if you look at the India market, I think we were talking about this before we started the conversation.
Yeah.
I was just at a ULI, not just, but a few months ago at a ULI Urban Land Institute conference in Mumbai. And one of the things that struck me was, number one, the size and scope of India just as a market, but the fact that 2/3 of the Indian population is still under the age of 35. So with that, there's a lot of focus because there's definitely going to be a lot of growth. And in that growth, we have to be responsible to people and planet when we do grow at that pace. So I think that's one of the things that India is definitely a focus market for us. One of the things that we're doing is obviously this, working with organizations like BuzzOnEarth, like yourself, to be able to reach as many people and educate as many people as possible. And another thing is, and you and I talked about this, was doing it at the grassroots level, at the educational systems, educating the educators. You and I had that conversation several months ago.
Yeah.
And then also, and at the very end, putting the resources in the ground in India at some point. We have to do this very strategically and think about this as we do it, but it's definitely something that we're considering.
Sure. So my question was more towards, connected with the cost-effective part of the well standard. So are we trying to bring in more refinement or more additions over there so that it is more suited to the cost-effective or cost-savvy audience in India?
I think right now, one of them, again, I mentioned this earlier, is the sector discounts, the emerging market discounts. That's pretty substantial. That's one way. And again, looking at some of the SMEs, looking at some of the smaller businesses to be able to be part of the well community and then allowing them to have those discounts. And then doing it at the educational levels. One of the things we do is we give heavy discounts for students to become well-accredited professionals.
Interesting. And one more point that actually is connected with the products. So many people approach us, even at BuzzOnEarth, that we have XYZ green material or a green building material or a product that can be used in a green building or a well-certified building. So how does it give them any kind of validation that, okay, this is good to go? So there is a concept called works with well,
Yes.
which is kind of similar and does address some of the pointers here. So would you like to elaborate a little more on how it functions and what are the eligibility? I know that I don't want to get into the deeper aspects of the criteria, but then at the same time, what are the core alignments when it comes to compatibility with well features?
Sure, no problem. I think, I don't want to confuse the audience too much because we're talking about so many different programs here. But
Yeah.
one thing I want to say about the Works with Well program, it's really kind of the last program that closes the entire loop in the well ecosystem. So as I mentioned earlier, we have the well building standard, which is the framework. We have certifications and ratings, which are the programs. We're able to implement it at scale. And then now with the Works with Well program, what we're trying to do is work with all of the manufacturers and suppliers and vendors that do have the products that you mentioned that can supplement the larger framework. So this was really born around the inquiry from the market. Manufacturers have always wanted to draw parallels with their products with our framework or with the framework. And one of the things that we've always had to do was remain agnostic. So as a standard setting organization, we cannot necessarily endorse a specific.
Right. Yeah.
However, in the past, what we've been able to do is give them the language to be able to talk about it. Having said all that, over the last decade, as we've grown, and as you know this, we've grown exponentially, so has our third-party network. And as our third-party network has grown, we've given them the opportunity to then review manufacturers, suppliers, and vendors in the projects and see how they map against the standard. And then that really becomes the licensing program. So essentially, we use a third-party a network to review products, see if they have this alignment, and if they have that alignment, we can basically say that this this product or this system or this platform aligns with the standards in the well framework.
So any of the, product manufacturers, if they want to get this tag that this works with well, they have to approach these third-party aligned vendors that you're talking about.
Sure. What they do is typically there is a application process. That application process is hosted by us.
Okay.
There's a questionnaire that gets filled out, it gets submitted in, and that's when it goes to a third party for review.
And this third party, what are their credentials like? Who are these people who review that?
That's a very good question. It's basically the same third parties that do a lot of the reviews for the well programs. So the well certifications and the well ratings and so on and so forth. So they're very familiar, and they go through a training process that we host and we go and we provide.
Okay, so coming back to our question on the market expansion. So we are having two key pillars to IWBI. One is the strong inclination on research-backed data and trying to build the entire system around that very strong research-backed data and insights. That is one. And second is a very high reliance on technology in order to do most of the I would say the implementation work. So how would you like to, how would you like to get forward with this now with the inclusion of new technologies like AI and so on? How is it going to build upon further as we enter into the new era?
Oh boy, I wish I had a crystal ball to be able to answer this question, because the question of AI is still one of those really difficult questions to be able to respond to. It changes so rapidly. But with regards to embracing technology, I think I'll have to backtrack a little bit to talk about what we're doing with regard to that. I think, if you were going to look at the environmental sustainability movement about 15 to 20 years ago, a lot of the goals were very aspirational. They were talking about trying to achieve this, trying to achieve that by certain dates and so on and so forth. And we still are. But if you now look at how if you look at a lot of the environmentally sustainable data that's out there, it's all data, stats, and facts. It's all being measured and monitored, and metrics are being set. So we're at a nascent stage right now with regards to technology. We've been around for 10 years. We're starting to pull that data together. And one of the things is it's a lot of data, and you can cut and slice that data in so many different ways. So one of the things that we do is we pull as much information together, and then we talk to the organizations and ask, well, what exactly are you trying to achieve? Is your leadership trying to achieve? And then if we have the data to support it, we output that. We've just recently put out a report at the beginning of this year, really talking about the ROI on healthy buildings. So that's kind of our first step and first foray into this. We're also creating dashboards where organizations, if they enroll into the program, they'll be able to see how their spaces are performing relative to the amount of population that they're actually affecting. And then you can see asset to asset, and you can cut and slice that data in terms of the way you want to tell your story.
And what kind of focus and want to know if there is a pie chart, and if I were to devote the focus on, say, the digital transformation and the AI bit, what focus would that be? What percentage of that pie would that be?
Oof. I would not be able to answer that question. I apologize, to be honest with you. I mean, we're growing so fast on the product sense that our technology is still trying to catch up with the rate that we're growing from a product and program standpoint. I'm sure it's out there. It's just not in my wheelhouse, and I wouldn't have that information to be able to share, and I wouldn't want to speak out of term.
That's fair enough, and that was anyway, out of the blue. I just happened to ask that because I was trying to visualize what kind of technology focus do we have, and if you would like to elaborate on any other technology integration that the organization is focused on, please.
I think what we're doing through the program that you'd mentioned earlier, through the Works with Well program, we're working. We're having conversations and we're talking to large corporations about their BMS systems, basically how to create optimum spaces and healthy spaces. And we're talking to several different organizations. So it's really looking at some of the hardware that exists already, some of the software that exists, and then how do you combine those together, and then what could be the future, with the technologies that they're coming up with. So those conversations are happening. We do have a technology team that works with them. To what level, obviously, these are just conversations that we're having. As technology changes, these conversations can change as well.
And how about, taking the data from the inhabitants, occupants of these buildings? Is there any focus on, collating that data through technology?
Sure, 100%. So right now, if you, an example would be Embassy REIT. What they did, they had 98 locations across their campuses in India. One of the things that they wanted to focus on within the well building standard was to focus on one concept across their entire assets, and that was the movement concept. So one of the things is as we pull those data in, we can see if they've actually hit those metrics that they've set for themselves, which they have. And then the next thing is they can choose another concept, indoor air quality or water quality or thermal comfort, and then start setting those metrics up. At the very end, we do give an annual report that has all of the different concepts and shows where they sit and how they compare to either their peers or across other organizations.
And any case studies that are, from the research and white paper standpoint, that are being worked upon right now on this?
Case studies specifically towards using technology, or?
Basically, I'm trying to see how we are trying to bridge the gap between the occupant data and what kind of comforts and what kind of interventions are being proposed and what they are being measured and recommended.
Well, I think one of the ways it's being used right now is when you have all of your assets within a portfolio, you can see which assets are actually performing well, with the data that comes in. And so you can see where you have a gap, where you need improvement, or where you're high performing, right?
Okay.
So then you can strategically make decisions on where you want to put the efforts and time and resources into either improve, close down, refocus. It helps with all of the planning around those assets.
That's very
And then,
interesting.
and I think a key part of that data is around how many people you're actually affecting. So as an example, if you have a very efficient a working data center and there's 5 people in there, as opposed to a grade B building where most of the people are headquarters, you would be able to make that assessment that we would need to upgrade that grade B space to a grade A space, so you could actually, affect more people with regards to health and wellness and well-being.
Great. And in terms of now market expansion, which is your forte, I would like to understand from you how we are planning to expand in India as well as the overall APAC region.
Like I said, I think what we've done with the market expansion, we're looking at 3 key countries at this point. We, obviously Asia Pacific. I always have to put this in context because obviously I have to work with my American counterparts and my European counterparts. And I always say that, when you're dealing with Europe and the Americas, it's one contiguous landmass, right? And you have, borders in between, but in essence, it's a contiguous landmass. When you come to Asia Pacific, you're geographically separated, you're culturally separated, you're currency separated. So there's a lot of different things. So when we look at Asia, we have to be very strategic with how we approach it. So we've selected 3, and that's Singapore, Japan, and India. As I mentioned, I think of the 3, chosen Singapore because it is kind of the Asia Pacific hub for corporate occupiers. Japan is a fast-growing market for us, but India is really, really the market that has all of the 3 trifecta because it does work. It does work internationally, but it also works independently. So there's 2 opportunities there. That's number 1. Number 2 is sheer size and scope, as I mentioned earlier. Then number 3 is the age demographic of a growing population. So that focus for us is pretty heavy, weighted in those 3 countries, but heavily focused on India.
And I would like to bring our discussion back to what we discussed about a couple of months back, that was on the focus on the youth in order to take the well movement forward. In India, like within the youth, there are about 360 million students that we have. And that's quite a number to, influence. And even if, say, 1% of them happen to be the ambassadors of wellness in built environment, that's more than the, desired goal achieved. So from that standpoint, what kind of initiatives and what kind of strategic interventions are we proposing for India market?
Well, I think that's one of the things. I think this is one of them. Obviously, working with organizations like BuzzOnEarth and working with individuals like yourself, and then brainstorming those ideas. I think you and I had a very, very good session several months ago to talk about how we do that.
Yes.
So I think that's just a continued effort, to be quite frank. We would obviously have to rely on the expertise of the people on the ground and the expertise of India is such a large and diverse country, north to south. You've got, I forget how many different languages spoken between, north to south, and then the cultures to match. So we would definitely have to rely on organizations like BuzzOnEarth to be able to help us guide through that in terms of how to penetrate this market and get critical mass.
And for the youth, if I understand, one of the things that we have in offering is the Well AP program. Is there anything else apart from that that we are looking to, build upon for the young segment?
Well, currently right now, I think one of the initiatives that we have right now is our Forum. And
Okay.
the Well right now is where you can gather quite a bit of information. You can have dialogue. We're trying to create a community around that, around health and wellness. I think that's another initiative that's pretty big with the industry. Obviously the Well AP, and then I think one of the things that we should continue our conversations on is really about how to set up programs within the educational institutions.
Okay, but that is part of, I think, 2024 agenda, not immediately.
Yeah, exactly.
So, all right. So, one of the things that also wanted to understand was that any case studies that you may want to refer. We spoke about 3 to 4 programs right now. We spoke about what works with Well. We spoke about Well at scale. We also spoke about cost-effective methods within Well. So, would you like to talk about any specific case studies that have not been covered yet? And in the meantime, I would request audiences, if there is any question, please feel free. This entire session is actually meant to serve to respond to your queries. So please feel free to come forward and ask questions.
I think case studies, I think the one that has kind of profoundly kind of affected me was working with the oil and gas industry on their DE&I kind of initiatives. It was really interesting when you look at, and the reason I specifically pull out the oil and gas industry or even the mining industry is that they have a heavy focus on health and safety. So when you look at their workplace guidelines, they're very robust and they're very strict and they're very restrictive. One of the things that we've been able to do is create a thread through all of the different workplace guidelines from a lot of different organizations by creating a standard that's kind of acceptable across the board and working through that. So using that again, as I mentioned earlier, kind of as their foundation that they build up on.
And from the broad standpoint, when it comes to organizations that are focused, say, only on D&I and may not be as much adhering to the environmental statutory practices in the sense that they are not really in the league of getting, say, LEED Platinum and so on. So and they may not be in the league of getting even a proper Well certification at this point in time, but they are really focused on going for D&I certification, the Well equity certification. So is that possible, or it has to be interlinked and it has to be
No. So the Well equity rating, it's not a certification, it's a rating because it's a focus, it's a hyper-focused subset of the standard.
Okay.
It can be standalone. It can be standalone. So an organization that is hyper-focused on that particular, again, as I mentioned, it'll be typically driven by the leadership. If DE&I is at the top of their mandates in their agenda, they can focus specifically on a Well equity rating specific for a site location or across their entire portfolio.
And do we have anyone from India who has taken this up as a rating?
I am currently working. There are 2 organizations. I don't know if they're public, so I can't mention their names, but one was meant to be the first to achieve it in India. They're still working through that. They had adopted the Well equity rating the moment it was launched. They're still working through that process. And then there's a large developer that's actually also looking at for consideration to be part of the workplace standards.
Great. Victor, you have any questions for the audience or anyone else that you would like to interact?
I think the only question that I would have is, like I mentioned earlier, India is such a big, diverse country. and a big target market for us. My question would be, what are some of the other things that are being done, either from an environmental or a social sustainability standpoint, that you're aware of or your audience may be aware of?
Yeah, so one of the most important things that's happening in India currently is a thriving startup ecosystem. So India is innovating, and India has moved beyond activism towards taking up action. So most of the problems that are considered to be climate-related challenges or wellness-related challenges or nutritional challenges, they are being met, head on by innovators, and these innovators range from that's a huge range. So within big organizations, there are specific verticals and sections that are focused on innovation. Then there are SMEs and MSMEs that are focused on solving point problems. And then there are a lot of new startups that are coming up with solutions for, problems across the breadth of climate change and sustainability issues. So that is one thing which is a very promising trend. And especially Bangalore is considered to be the Silicon Valley of India, wherein we have so many startups and ideas coming in. The second is that on translational research. So there is a lot of focus on translational research, which was not earlier as much there. The earlier research used to just sit at the juncture of, publishing the research or publishing a white paper or publishing a thesis. But now there is too much of focus on ensuring that the research also sees the light of the day by trying to convert that into a viable solution, which is practical and which is having a market. So these are two trends that are very positive. And
so are you seeing an upsurge in entrepreneurship with the younger generation?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So we used to have 7 technology institutions in India. Those were called IITs, but after, the recent thing, we have about 17 IITs now in the country. And then there are several NITs, that are National Institute of Technologies. Then there are regional colleges again. So there's too much of focus on creating tech entrepreneurs as well as solution providers to various problems that are there. And there is a scope also. I'm not saying that everything is sorted out here. So since it's a huge and vast country with a huge demographic that is young and happening, so there is a lot of scope for even bringing in more focus when it comes to these areas and trying to convert that energy into some productive result.
Well, I think that gives us a great platform to be able to do some of the grassroots work that we talked about.
Yeah.
And bringing, obviously people and planet initiatives, especially the people initiatives. I think sometimes, I always go with a quote from, the head of sustainability from Starbucks. He always goes, "My job is not to save the planet. My job is to help save humanity." And I think that is definitely a statement that, resonates, because if there's no planet, there's no humanity, right? So if there's no, there's always going to be a planet without humans, but without a planet, there's going to be no humans. So I think it's something that we always have to take in consideration.
Absolutely. And whenever I go and give a talk on sustainability, I often tell audiences that we are not here to save the planet. We are here to save our own selves. Yeah. Because as a race, we will be totally wiped off this planet, and this planet is going to stay here. So another thing which is also, important to mention over here is, from Indian standpoint, is the newer trend where the connect with the grassroots is also resurfacing. And that I'm mentioning because there's too much of democratization of content thanks to our wonderful social media. So we are now able to listen to the most unheard stories, most unheard solutions, and most unheard, populace, which was earlier not happening. And that also gives an avenue and a pathway to go and create an impact at that level, that is at the absolute bottom of the pyramid. So which is amazing trend, which I think I would thank social media for making this happen. But this gives us a lot of wings in order to create some real impact.
Yeah, well, we'll look to your guidance for that, because I think, like I said, you you're on the ground, obviously, and understand what's resonating with the Indian population. So I think we have a continuous dialogue with what we can do to make this impactful for everyone.
Yeah. So with that, I would like to thank you, Victor. Thank you so much for your time and your insightful responses. It was really lovely chatting with you.
It's always lovely catching up with you and seeing you. Hopefully we can do this in person.
We should. Thank you. And I would
Okay.
like to leave the room open for questions now. Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions. We have Victor and Alice here, both are from IWBI. And we'll be happy to take your questions even beyond the session. But in case you want to ask something, please feel free to do that.
Yeah, hi. I'm from Chennai, Venkat.
Okay.
I am an ISO lead auditor for Environment Management System, which is 14K, and 22K for BCP, 22341 for SIPTED, that is crime prevention through environmental design. With that interest, I got into the building side. My background is commerce and criminology. I do green building certification. I'm an AP, and I just wanted to take up well and other certifications as well. Will this be viable to take up all certifications because the client would be the same target? You advise me. Or what is this different from a building certification? True, well, or true, or, what is the difference? Thanks.
So just a quick answer, if I understand the question, if there's the well certification and a green certification or building certification, there is quite a bit of overlap. The way I really like to simply explain it is the way Jack Noonan always explained it. He goes, when we're talking about green certifications or building certifications, we're talking about the breadth of, light, water. We're talking about the quantity of it. When we're talking about well, we're talking about those same things. We're still addressing light. We're still addressing thermal comfort. We're still addressing water. We're still addressing sound. But we're talking about the depth. We're looking at the quality. So there is overlaps. And if you know a little bit about the well standard, we do work with a lot of the green certifications out there. In fact, we're working with the USGBC right now with a joint scorecard with LEED, with other green certifications like BREEAM, Neighbors in Australia, Green Star in Australia, Green Mark in Singapore. We do have a tool called crosswalks that kind of show the equivalencies of where we do have some synergies. And just generally speaking, there's about 20% that do have some sort of synergies, and then we depart from there. Then we start talking about community and mind and movement and things like that are more health related. But there are synergies between the certifications that are out there. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, in the interest of time, we will have to call it a day. Thank you so much for being a patient audience, and thanks everyone for joining in today. Thank you so much, Victor.
Thank you very much. Nice to see everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.